Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is June 24th, 2024, Monday, June 24, 2024. And our first story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories is titled Syphilis Victims Unearthed Under Oldest Hospital in South America. Few could imagine that inside a house in Lima, Peru, located on a busy street close to where there was once a massacre and doors away from a costume shop, a hospital that treated the insane and those suffering from syphilis had been erected 500 years before. On January 18, 1535, coinciding with Epiphany, Conquistador Francisco Pizarro built a church in Lima. 3 years later, the Hospital de Nuestra Señora de la Concepción was planned. However, it wasn't built until 1552 and renamed the Hospital Real de San Andrés, which was founded by Viceroy Andrés Hurtado de Wildoso, a military officer. The area chosen was next to the then existing convent of Santo Domingo. Prior to this, Francisco de Molina cared for indigent patients at his home and what is now the Barrios Altos Lima area of Lima, but now they had a place to go. Those brought to the hospital were expected to die soon, either from a disease or injury, and to allow them a dignified death. Those with mild symptoms were cared for in their own home. In 1711, the chair of anatomy was established where surgeons and students performed dissections on the bodies of those who had died in the hospital. In 1792, the hospital housed the country's first anatomical amphitheater. Also, it served as the first house of the Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. In 1868, a yellow fever epidemic raged. It claimed 6,000 lives, making it evident the hospital was inadequate to meet the needs of the growing population. In 1875, the building was converted into an orphanage for girls. The convent continued there, and another hospital was built called Hospital Nacional 2 de Mayo. There was a story told that a dessert made by the nuns was created on a marble plate that had previously served as the hospital's autopsy table. The original building is believed to be the oldest hospital in South America. 20 years ago, remains of a 19th century fountain, the cemetery, a garden, a colonial-era trash pit, and a vaulted structure were unearthed. Hector Walder Salazar, a lead archaeologist in Lima, explained that people who did not survive treatment were buried here. Skeletal remains were discovered under only 12 inches of earth. 2 years ago, archaeologists started to unearth a complex that covered 2 acres. It housed the mentally ill who suffered from loqueria and a classroom for physicians dating back to the 16th century. According to historians, the mummies of Pachacutec, Huayna Capac, and Tupac Yupanqui, and 2 others were sent from Cusco, which was the capital of the Incan Empire, to Lima. Viceroy Andrés Hurtado de Wildoso ordered they should be buried at the hospital. For the last 200 years, efforts have been made to find the remains, but without success. In June 2022, it was disclosed that 50 of the skeletal remains in the forgotten hospital cemetery were Spanish men, many who had died from syphilis or bone deformities in their skulls. Archaeologists also found a copper cross hanging from the neck of one of them, probably used to ward off the uglier symptoms caused by the disease. According to the Colombian hypothesis, sailors in Columbus's fleet brought the previously unknown affliction back to Europe on their return from the New World in 1493 AD. The connection between the disease and promiscuity were not lost on the Christian population of the 16th century, who believed the devil's hand was at work. This could also explain the design of the building as a crucifix. The patients who came to the hospital were given a bed in the passageway so they could hear Mass, while they said ritual and religion were very strong. The orphanage transitioned into a public school where children ran and played above the forgotten graves. The school closed after the earthquake of 2007. Within the last 100 years, the land was used for a police station, various shops, and a Chinese restaurant. In 1991, 15 Peruvians were killed by a clandestine military group in another building. Archaeologists have also found a crypt in pre-Hispanic ceramics that predate the hospital. In 2023, it was announced that a silver macuquina was found in one of the courtyards of the Royal Hospital of San Andres. This is a type of coin minted manually with hammer blows, which was produced from the 16th to the 18th century. And it makes you wonder, what was it about this spot that brought everybody to build something there? Because from what they're saying, even prior to the erection of the hospital, convent, everything that was there was something already there from the indigenous or native population. Then they built this, and then afterwards they kept right on building because they had kids running around and playing, with basically over a cemetery. So I wonder what it is about that place. Okay, let's go on to our next story. This is out of also Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled "Who's Using the Detroit River as a Dumping Ground for Men's Bodies for the Last 5 Decades, but only in June." Between 1968 to 2015, 8 victims have been found in the river. So far, they've all remained unidentified. The Detroit River winds for 28 miles from Lake St. Clair to Lake Erie and acts as a U.S.-Canada border. On June 9, 1968, victim number 1 was a white man aged 55 to 65. When his remains were recovered from the Detroit River near Fort Wayne, decomposition had set in, but his death was listed as a homicide. He was 5 feet 7 inches, weighed a little under 200 pounds, and he had gray hair. He wore a blue pea coat, a black shirt over a gray shirt, and long johns. Black rubbers covered brown shoes, and he wore a gold-tone ring with a white stone in his left ring finger. He had been in the water for about a week. June 15th, 1983, 15 years had passed, and the second victim was recovered from the river behind the Detroit Free Press building. He was between 40 to 50 years of age, 5 feet 9 inches, and weighed about 180 pounds. Due to decomposition, identification was not possible. He was wearing a green corduroy jacket, and warmer chemical packs were found in the front pocket. Underneath, he had on a blue, gray, red checkered shirt. He had on jeans and gray underwear. On his feet were insulated boots with striped white socks. On the same day, another man, younger, was recovered from the Detroit River at the foot of Joseph Campau Avenue. Kamapu Avenue. He was also white, in his 20s, 5 feet 9 inches, weighing 155 pounds. He had brown curly hair, a sparse goatee, and his eyes were brown. Like the others, identification was not possible due to decomposition. He was wearing a Kmart brand green khaki coat, a branded Lion blue jeans zippered jacket, black long-sleeve synthetic shirt size 15 or 33, gray pants with Scott written on the inside, brief-style underwear inscribed with Lewis 31854 inside. His socks were blue and gray and non-matching. He wore style slip-on shoes, size 7.5. June 30th, 1983. 2 weeks later, a black male, 15 to 25 years old, was found in the river near the foot of Helen Street. Identification again could not be completed due to decomposition. He was 5 feet 6 inches, and the weight could not be estimated. He was wearing brown pants but no shirt or shoes. He had 2 gold chains around his neck. I don't think they were trying to rob him. June 17th, 1990. 7 years later, a black male in his 30s was taken from the Detroit River downriver from Lake St. Clair. He had been in the water for days, and identification could not be completed because of decomposition. He was 5 feet 10 inches and weighed 215 pounds. His fingernails were long, he had a scar on his left wrist and a mole on his right thigh. He was wearing only white socks and underwear. June 11th, 1994. 4 years passed since the last body was found. This time the victim was a white man aged 35 to 45. Authorities believed he died either in 1993 or 1994, and he came from another country, possibly Russia. He was 5 feet 8 inches, weighed 141 pounds, and had brown hair and eyes. 2 Moscow subway tokens and a lighter were found near the body. He wore Levi's along with Chinese laundry mark brown sweatpants, a black t-shirt, and a blue sweatshirt. He had one size 24 EE, which is a foreign size, tennis shoes, and a belt. Decomposition prevented further identification. June 8th, 2006. 12 years passed until another body was discovered. It was a black man between 40 to 60 years of age. He was found near the Belle Isle Harbor Master Station. Like the others, decomposition had set in, and police estimate he could have died in 2005 or 2006. He was 5 feet 7 inches and weighed 190 pounds. August 7, 2007. The body of a young man already in a state of decomposition was found floating in the Detroit River near East Jefferson Street. He was approximately 16 to 25 years of age and measured 5 feet 2 inches or less. Short guy. One or both of his hands were not recovered, and his face was mostly skeletonized. He was black or possibly multiracial. He had on two sweatpants, yellow and green, a white undershirt, and a blue knit sweater. He was wearing socks with blue canvas deck shoes size 10. It was estimated he could have been put in the river in June. June 13th, 2015. A white male was taken from the Detroit River near the GM Renaissance Center. He could have died in 2014 or 2015. He had partially gray hair, cut short. He was clean shaven and was wearing Diesel Industries jeans, a white and blue striped button up shirt, a black leather belt, and Hermes brand black leather loafers. Decomposition did not allow further identification. The Detroit River acts as a border between the United States and Canada and runs for 28 miles. Because of its location, it is one of the busiest waterways in the country. The Detroit River is no stranger to murder victims being thrown into its depths. In July 2012, the bodies of a man and a woman were pulled from the Detroit River. Both bodies had been decapitated. The hands and feet had also been cut off. A fisherman discovered a circular saw and a suitcase with body parts inside. He was setting up his fishing gear along the river seawall near Fox Creek when he saw what he described as three legs. The area along the Detroit River is popular with anglers who come during the summer to fish for rock bass and walleye. Fox Creek connects to several narrow canals accessible from residential backyards. The victims were later identified as Chris Hill, 42, and his fiancée Danielle Greenway, 32. An autopsy found Hall was shot 6 times, including twice to the head. Greenway was shot once through the mouth. Within days of the discovery of the bodies, Roger Bowling, who was Greenway's ex-boyfriend, was arrested for the crime. The 39-year-old had been staying as a house guest of the couple for only 3 weeks before he killed them. He had asked Greenway to stay there until he got back on his feet after a run of bad luck. Robert Slick, a former friend and roommate of the accused, testified at a preliminary hearing that Bowling said he would cut Greenway up and place her in a cooler before dumping it in the water. He said he had 10 conversations with Bowling around 2004 where they discussed how they get rid of the women in their lives. The pair knew each other since grade school. He said that Bowling's anger toward Greenway was fueled because she was dating someone else even though they had broken up 5 years before. It was believed Bowling used his father's boat to take the bodies out to the river after he shot them at the house they shared. Bowling was charged with 2 counts each of first-degree murder and mutilation of a body. In July 2014, Bowling was found guilty. In October, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Abiding by a devilish timetable, in June 2023, a body of an unidentified man was found in the Detroit River. He was in the waters at West Jefferson Avenue and 24th Street. An autopsy was to be made to determine the cause of death, but since the discovery, the authorities have released no further information. This would be victim number 9. Unfortunately, neither gender or time dictates when bodies are left in the river. On April 10, 1968, the mutilated nude body of a woman was found floating in the river in the downtown area by 2 postal employees. Her head, hands, and feet were missing. She appeared to have been in the water for about a year and was badly decomposed. She was estimated to have been 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed around 125 pounds. As of August 2023, she remains unidentified. The river is even the final resting place for inanimate objects. In 2009, a bronze statue was recovered by a police dive team. It had been stolen in May 2001 and was valued at about $100,000. The statue measures 6 feet, weighs 300 pounds, and is called the Nude. It was part of a fountain and was displayed at the gardens near the Grosse Pointe War Memorial Ballroom since the 1960s. The thieves sawed apart the copper pipes at the base of the fountain and dragged the statue to a vehicle. It's strange to think that after so much trouble to take the statue, it was dumped in the river. Those responsible have never been identified, much less what motivated them. So, yes, women, well, mostly all these men, they show up in June. And I think that's what's really sad is that no one's ever come forward to say, I'm missing a son, a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a friend, a neighbor, anybody. So these men are found floating in the river. Sometimes they're fresh, sometimes they're not, which means they've been missing sometimes even for maybe weeks or days or whatever. And they are not they don't, either don't match a missing persons report, or if there how's this if there's ever a missing persons report issued, which is very sad. All these men have been killed and dumped in the Detroit River. They've never been ID'd because, again, of decomposition. But what's sad is that nobody's ever come forward and said, hey, I'm missing, or so and so hasn't been seen. And they could say, well, wait a minute. We found someone that might be this person that matches it somehow. So not even, and I'm sure they're being buried in a potter's field, which is very sad because basically that means that these people are killed. Nobody cares what happens to them. Okay, let's go off to this is a little ghost story, and it's out of MSN. It's titled "The House That Haunts Me." My mother's drive-bys began even before mine. 12 years after my father died, my mother remarried and moved into her new husband's Rambler on the other side of town. Shortly after, she sold the house our family had lived in on Vernon Street for 30 years to an unmarried woman, a lawyer who works morning to evening. Why would she need a house the size of ours just to sleep in all by herself? Mom's updates came periodically over lunch or at a family gathering. She's not taking care of my flower beds. The lawn is covered in dandelions. All of my azaleas are dying. And the one that seemed to hurt her the most. She cut down the hickory tree. There's just a hole torn in the yard where it used to be. There she would grieve for the hickory. That she would grieve for the hickory was a surprise. Every autumn, hickory nuts and broken shells would rain down on our lawn, turning the grass into a rolling minefield of debris. My weary mother was out front constantly, armed with a rake. I had thought she loathed that tree, but I was wrong. After her description of its uprooting, I drove by to witness the scene for myself. The lawn that had once seemed alive to me, moving constantly in a pattern of sunlight and shadow, now looked scorched, brown, and sad. I soon learned that if I drove by at night, sometimes the blinds would be raised and I could see into the brightly lit rooms. Only once was I ever seen. My car was idling at the curb when a woman peered out a window at me. It was twilight, and I could plainly see the white shape of her face, though I had to imagine the squinting of her eyes. The furrowing of her brow. She puzzled over my intentions. Panic, I scrambled to put the car in drive and took off. As I wheeled around the cul-de-sac, I looked again. The woman was still there, and she was watching me. That evening was several decades ago, but it was not the end of my forays into house stalking. For many years, as I raised my daughters, I found reasons to travel through that neighborhood on my way somewhere else. One afternoon, my teenage daughter was with me, and we saw a young man on the front steps smoking a cigarette. Oh my God, there's someone outside, I said, speeding up, embarrassed, ready to flee. Suddenly, my daughter put her hand on my arm and yelled, "Stop the car!" Startled, I braked. Before I understood what was happening, she stepped out and approached the young man. "Hi," she called out to him. Her pretty face and long, blowing hair seemed to strike him speechless. "My mom grew up in this house," she continued. "Do you think we could go in and take a look around?" He shrugged. "Sure, I guess. Why not?" The first thing that struck me was how compressed everything looked. As a child, the house had seemed spacious, ample enough to contain the 5 lives that resided there. I had last stood in this living room when I was 30 years old, hardly a child. Had I not noticed its size because I saw it only as home, as a place that defied physical dimensions? Awkwardly, I moved around the first floor, peering into my grandmother's bedroom rather than entering it. It was someone else's space now. The kitchen was tiny, a narrow strip of appliance and counter space. And yet, somehow my sister and I had eaten our frosted flakes every morning at a table near the window, while my mother darted back and forth, while my grandmother made tea, while my father read the newspaper at the breakfast bar. Into that kitchen sink I had tipped my long hair, my small body lying on the green counter, while my mother scrubbed my head with Prel shampoo. Our host tagged behind us. I longed to venture upstairs into my old bedroom. I wanted to descend into the basement to see if it remained as I remembered it. The long bar with its red leather stools, the wall of glass blocks, the red and black floor tiles. But it seemed presumptuous to further invade this private space. I thanked the young man and we left. Immediately I regretted not being pushier. I might never get another chance, but I wanted much more than to merely walk through it. I wanted to spend hours in it, alone. I wanted to explore every cranny. I wanted to wait in its silent air to discover if I was truly alone there, or if some vestige remained of those who had shared that house with me. I wondered whether my fixation with the house marked me as unusual. After I posted online about my obsession, dozens of friends shared their experience, and I saw that my feelings were not uncommon at all. Going back to my old town and street is like taking an intoxicant, a strong one, Pam wrote, and I'm never satisfied, even though I don't know what I'm looking for. Jeff said that he often drives by his former home. Sometimes I park the car and try to peek around the premises. It makes me sad to think of someone else living in my house. Francesca and Rebecca have both been back into their childhood homes. Rebecca's walkthrough when it was on the market left her philosophical. It was different inside and out, but my grandmother will always be there. Francesca tells me she's always invited inside when she returns to her hometown. It makes me happy, she says, to see a happy family in the house. All of these friends recall their childhoods fondly, but not everyone's childhood is idyllic. I avoid my childhood home like the plague, Danielle said. When I find myself in my old neighborhood, I drive past the street the way one might drive by a bloody train wreck, wondering if I have the steel to look at it. What is it that feeds my obsession with my former home? Is it really that Cape Cod with its dormer windows, its hidden closets in the eaves, its Art Deco touches that I miss? Or is it the people who lived there with me? Is it the sense of safety and happiness I felt there that I long to reclaim? I'm the last survivor of those beloved days. My father died when I was 16 and my grandmother shortly after that. Decades later, my mother passed away. Within 2 years, my sister followed her. No one who lived in that house with me remains. If I want to remember it, if I don't want those days to slip away, to blur, to disintegrate, there is no one to rely on but myself. A friend sent me a link to the house's property records. I soon learned the names of the current owners. I found the wife's name on Facebook and sent off what I hope was an engaging, disarming message. I included photographs of myself in the house at various ages, so she would know that my claim was legitimate. Her reply was amiable, receptive, and also startling. She revealed that her husband had found several photographs of my family that had been left behind. I was stunned and intrigued. The photos turned out to be not nearly as exciting as I imagined they would be. A shot of me sitting on our back patio, one of my mother and our cat sunning himself in the front yard, a photo of my sister so close up it might have well been the world's first selfie. A friend recently sent me a link to a music video from Miranda Lambert's The House That Built Me. I began crying in the opening seconds and continued through the entire song. A young woman revisits her childhood home, wandering room to room, and has visions of herself as a young girl, images of her brother and parents. Two lines stick with me. If I could just come in, I swear I'll leave. Won't take anything but a memory. Would a one-time visit satisfy me? No one tags behind Lambert as she explores. If I could commune like that, uninterrupted, would it put my longing to rest? Perhaps. Especially if my family materialized before me as hers does. Is that what I seek? A visit by ghosts? If I said yes, would that mean I was crazy? Or would it only mean I was bereft, lonely, and sad deep down to my bones? I've dreamed about buying that home. My parents paid a mere $20,000 for it in 1955. According to estimates, the house is now worth over $1 million. I could probably find a way to afford it, but it would be financially unwise. Still, I have been curious whether there are people who have pulled it off, who have purchased their past. I posted my question on a local Facebook page and received dozens of responses. Most were just people saying that they too had dreamed of doing this, but a few shared experiences that gave me a lot to think about. Karen had bought her childhood home and lived in it with her family for a year. It brought me so much happiness when we all sat down to dinner together. It made me feel so close to my parents. I thought if it were possible for them to reach out to me, it was definitely going to happen there. Kenneth offered a different perspective. He told me that his family still owned his grandparents' house, a home he had spent much of his childhood in. When he was transferred back to the city, he decided to stay in it, but as he settled down to sleep that first night, he realized something was different. Although I knew quite well every fiber, brick, and board of the house, something had changed. I came to the sad realization that home wasn't home anymore. The warmth that made that house a home was strangely absent now, and I knew it. The heart of that home was those dear people who are no longer there. The house now stands empty. I imagine what it would be like to move back into the house on Vernon Street, to pull the covers up to my chin as I lie in my old bedroom, to wake to the remembered spill of sunlight through the window. Perhaps the experience would draw me closer to those I have lost, and yet their absence might feel even more profound to me within those walls that once held us all, that what I might be buying was actually a life of regret. But if someday, on one of my drive-bys, I see a for sale sign in the yard, I'm not sure that this realization will have the power to temper me. For now, impossibility keeps me from the quandary of having to decide. And perhaps impossibility is as good a place as any to live out the remainder of my days. And this is really interesting because, notice, the people that want to go back and revisit their childhood homes are people that have good childhood memories. Good childhood memories. All right? And even though this is not technically a ghost story, it's almost like people want to recapture what it was living, that life in that house. And I think also what's interesting is back then people used to stay in their houses. People are not so transient. In other words, people would live out like many, many years, 10, 12, 20, 30, 40 years in the same house. That's why they have all these memories personally and of course of their families. And I think it's very interesting and it makes you wonder, is that also what draws ghosts to stay in a certain place? Never know. Okay, let's go on to the next story. This is out of CBS, and this is titled Alcatraz Island Climate Researchers Have Haunting Experience Staying in Prison Cells. This San Francisco team of researchers who built a 3D map of Alcatraz Island to track erosion spent some spooky nights sleeping in the prison cells that house some of the nation's most notorious criminals. During their 3-week stay on the island, the team slept in D Block, where prison authorities kept the most dangerous inmates. That meant no cushy mattresses, showers, or heat. They used communal toilets and bought their own food. Excuse me. A few cells down from there, hold on, let me take a drink of water. I think Alcatraz scared me. Okay. A few cells down from where lead researcher Pete Kelsey slept was the cell where infamous inmate Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, spent time. Kelsey's team had full access to areas that are off limits to daily tourists, including the hospital wing with its dentist's office, x-ray room, and infirmary. The researchers also slept near the tiled cells, with no furnishings where the mentally ill were held. Adjacent to these cells, a dismal shower that locked from the outside, keeping prisoners in. I did not like being in the hospital, said Kelsey. That place gave me the willies. Alcatraz Island is said to be haunted, and according to the team, it is. Kelsey told the Bay Area News that while most of his team snored while they slept, one member, a retired law enforcement officer, was exceedingly loud. Team members asked him if he could please sleep inside the mugshot room instead of D Block, which he agreed to do. The next morning, as Kelsey went to retrieve the man to start the day, he found the team member outside the mugshot room sleeping with his gear. When the man woke up, Kelsey asked him what happened, and the volunteer replied he would never, ever sleep again in that room, no matter what. The man explained that in the middle of the night, he woke up to the sounds of a crowd of people in the room above the mugshot room. He said these ghosts were moving furniture around, and a non-existent piano began to play. He grabbed his stuff, left the room, and refused to go back in. From that point on, everyone put up with the snoring. The anecdote mirrors what others have reported about Alcatraz being haunted, with many visitors attesting they have heard unnerving sounds of moaning and crying coming from the cell blocks. Some say inmates and prison guards who died on Alcatraz over the years continue to haunt the island. In addition, some Native American tribes believe the island was a place of malevolent spirits. Interesting, huh? You're there to gauge something and you end up thinking, oh. In other words, you're not ghost hunting, but you still have the ghost experience. All right, coming back to Stranger Than Fiction stories, the next one is titled Rage, Thy Name is Carl. Quote, in my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings. For all these things, I am not in the least bit sorry. Unquote. This is from a gentleman, if I can call him that, named Carl Panzram. Carl Panzram was a tall, tattooed man with ruthless gray eyes. He stowed away on a ship bound for Angola around 1920 to work as a merchant seaman. After arriving, he bought a ticket on a Belgian steamer headed to Lobito Bay. Once there, he hired half a dozen local guides for a crocodile hunting expedition. But Panzram had other prey on his mind. As their canoe wended its way down the river, he shot each crew member dead, sodomized their corpses before feeding them to the hungry crocodiles lurking in the waters. He took their canoe and headed back to town. That was just one of many crimes, including 23 murders and more than 1,000 rapes of young boys and men Panzram admitted to committing. Unlike charming and cunning serial killer Ted Bundy, Panzram remained brutally honest. For all of these things, I am not the least bit sorry, he seethed in his autobiography, penned from his prison cell. I hate the whole damn human race, including myself. Carl Panzram seemed to have been born under unlucky stars. In 1871, his father, Johann Panzram, an immigrant from Poland, married Bertha Bartz and had 3 children with her. She died in 1877 after giving birth to their youngest child, Martha, who died a year later. Another child, Herman, born in 1877, was given over to paternal family members who adopted and brought the baby up. In 1878, John Panzram married Bertha Price, who had 3 children of her own from a previous marriage, Anna, Louisa, and Gustav Price. Bertha had immigrated from Germany. Johann and Bertha had 3 children of their own, Albert in 1884, Louise in 1889, and Carl in 1891. The couple farmed the land in Minnesota, and when Carl was 7 years old, his father abandoned the family. He was beaten by his older half-brothers who were already adults when he was a boy. This is when he started his life of crime. When he was 8, he was convicted of drunk and disorderly conduct. In 1898, he was sent to Red Wing Reform School in St. Cloud as a plea deal for a string of burglaries. He was introduced into sadism within the walls of Red Wing by enduring beatings and rapes. In return, he started a fire in the workshop. He had spent 6 years within its walls. By the time he was a teenager, he had become an alcoholic. In 1906, after he had set the fire, he was paroled into his mother's care. She was grieving over the death of her older son, Louis Price, who had drowned in a logging accident. Panzram ran away from home and hitched rides on freight trains. During a ride in a boxcar, he was gang raped by transients who left him a sadder, sicker, but wiser boy, Panzram wrote in his autobiography. As Panzram grew into a muscular 6-foot man, he became the victimizer instead of the victim. He paid back in kind by raping hobos, sometimes forcing one hobo to rape another while he held them at gunpoint. Once, while he was raping a hobo, he was found in the boxcar by a brakeman. He forced the hobo to sodomize the brakeman before he did it himself. In 1911, Carl was keeping company with an Indian when they robbed a railroader of $35. In case anybody, railroader is a workman on the railroads. They tied his arms and legs and stuffed a sock in his mouth. I figured that as I had such a good chance as that, I would commit a little sodomy on him. He is still there unless the buzzards and coyotes have finished the last of him. This was around the time he tried to enlist in the Federal Mexican Army in Ciudad Juarez. After this, he was sent to the Montana State Reformatory, where he quickly engineered an escape. But where Panzram went, trouble followed. In 1908, he did 3 years in Leavenworth for burglary, committed shortly after enlisting in the U.S. Army in 1907. When he was released, he was 19 years old and had grown strong from doing hard labor. Around 1913, he did a stretch in Montana's Big Pen. Then he was using the alias of Jeff Davis. This was one of many aliases he used during his life. Upon his release, he raped countless young men and boys as he made his way through Idaho, California, and other states along the Columbia River. In 1915, he was arrested in Chinook, Michigan for burglary, and he escaped after 8 months into a 1-year sentence. He headed to Oregon, where he burglarized buildings and burned down churches, something he regularly did throughout his travels. He was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in Oregon State Penitentiary. He agreed to disclose the location of stolen property in exchange for leniency, but was still sentenced to 7 years. This enraged him so much since he felt betrayed by the prosecution that he broke out of his cell and set fire to the jail. He was transferred to Salem Correctional Facility, known as the toughest prison in the state. There he managed to burn down the prison workshop and flax mill, incite a prison revolt, and he rampaged with an axe. This got him an additional 7 years for his troubles. Henry Percy Minto, also known as Harry Minto, had been a hard-working and well-regarded peace officer for many years when he was elected into the office of sheriff in 1907. He spent many years on the Salem police force, serving as an officer, a captain, and as a Salem marshal. On May 1st, 1915, Harry Minto took over as a warden at the Oregon State Penitentiary. 4 months later, on September 27th, Warden Minto was shot and killed while on a manhunt for Otto Hooker, who was serving a 2.5-year sentence for burglary. He had been outside of the prison walls on a work detail when he fled. Hooker had made his way into Jefferson, where he was confronted by Marshal Benson, as he was still dressed in prison stripes. A struggle ensued and Hooker got a hold of the marshal's gun after striking him unconscious. The prisoner stood over Benson and shot him, but he would survive. Word of what happened to Benson reached Minto late that night. He, along with Officer Johnson, searched the railroad tracks running north out of Albany for Hooker. Close to midnight, they found him and exchanged gunfire, since he still had Benson's gun. Warden Minto was killed when he was struck in the forehead with a bullet. Hooker was killed the next day by a posse of officers that came from across the region to hunt him down. What part did Panzram play in this? He was the one that helped fellow inmate Hooker break out. Panzram made his own escape in September 1917, seriously injuring a guard. He was involved in several shootouts before being recaptured. In May 1918, he saw the prison bars and escaped stowing away on a freight train heading east. He shaved off his mustache and started using the name John O'Leary. But this time he got out of the country by hiring onto the steamship James S. Whitney, headed to South America. Along the way, he worked in several places, including a copper mine in Peru and an oil rig in Chile, which for some unknown reason he burnt down. While in Panama, he tried to steal a boat with the help of a drunken shipmate. The crew on the boat were all killed. His travels took him to London, Edinburgh, where he did a short stint in jail, Paris, and Hamburg. In 1920, Panzram burgled William Howard Taft's home in New Haven, stealing jewelry, bonds, and a .45 caliber handgun, which he used in several murders. Ironically, Taft, who served as Secretary of War in 1907, approved the sentence that sent Panzram to Leavenworth for 3 years when he was younger. That same year, Panzram strangled a 12-year-old with his belt. This was near Boston, but he could not recall the boy's name. Flush with money from his robberies, he purchased a yacht named the Akista, which he renamed the John O'Leary, in homage to his alter ego. He visited the local taverns and lured sailors back to the yacht with promises of liquor and work. Once there, he got them drunk, sodomized them, took their money, and shot them in the head before dumping the weighted body in Long Island Sound. In the meantime, he sailed around robbing other yachts. He would go on to kill 10 sailors in a 3-week period. He noticed his nautical neighbors were growing suspicious, and he weighed anchor with 2 of the sailors and meandered along the Jersey shore. Near Atlantic City, a gale blew up that smashed the yacht to pieces, and Panzram and his 2 passengers barely made it to shore. His 2 intended victims disappeared, unaware of how close they had come to a watery grave. In 1921, Panzram was sent to jail for 6 months in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Upon his release, he joined a maritime union that was in the middle of a labor strike. Panzram was involved in a gun battle with police due to a confrontation with strikebreakers. He jumped bail and stowed away on a ship bound for Luanda, Angola. He landed a job as a foreman on an oil rig owned by Sinclair Oil Company. Panzram was not deterred by being on a different continent. He raped and killed a young boy, which he later described the act in his confession as, quote, "His brains were coming out of his ears when I left him, and he will never be any deader," end quote. He returned to Lobeto Bay, living at a fishing village, where the natives suspected him of the boy's murder. After this, he hired the ill-fated guides that would end up as crocodile food. Panzram knew he had to leave Lobito Bay since he was seen with the men, which had not returned with him. He headed to Point Banana, which was up the Congo River, and from there he made it to the Gold Coast. He funded a trip to the Canary Islands by robbing farmers, but then he ran out of money and robbery victims. He stowed away on a ship bound for Lisbon, Portugal, since Angola at that time was under Portuguese rule. But he soon found the authorities were aware of the crimes he committed in Africa, and he made his stay there a brief one. He stowed away on a ship and arrived in the United States in 1922. By now, Panzram had learned to keep on the move and change his name, especially after committing a crime, which was quite often. He renewed his captain's license and planned to steal a boat and make it the Akista, which of course was lost 2 years before. He ended up in Salem, Massachusetts, in search of a ship that was similar to his one-time yacht. On July 18, 1922, he crossed paths with 12-year-old Henry McMahon, a crime that went unsolved for 6 years. Panzram headed to New York, aware that once the boy's body was discovered, law enforcement would be swarming the streets looking for the perpetrator. Henry's body was not found for 3 days, giving him a considerable head start. He continued in his search for a replacement boat and rented an apartment in Yonkers using the name of John O'Leary and got a job at a mill. He met George Wallowson, 15, and later wrote about the teenager. I started to teach him the finer art of sodomy, but I found he had been taught all about it and he liked it fine. George's predilection saved his life, at least for the time being. Even though his victims were usually men, on June 16, 1923, he strangled a Kingston, as in New York, woman for the fun it gave me. Later in the summer of 1923, he stole a 38 feet long boat and he headed for Long Island Sound. He burglarized homes and boats in Connecticut since he docked at New Haven. He picked up George Wallowson and told him he could work on the yawl as they made their way upriver. In a small bay off Hudson River, they repainted the boat and changed the name. Panzram went on shore to look for a possible buyer. He found a young man that was interested, and they had a few drinks together on the ship. The man turned out not to be a buyer, but a criminal himself who tried to stick up Panzram. However, Panzram anticipated the situation and shot the man twice in the head and dumped the body overboard after weighing it down. George saw what happened, and one has to wonder if he realized he was a witness to a murder. Apparently he did, because he swam ashore when they docked in Newburgh. When he reached Yonkers, he told police about being sexually assaulted by Panzram. Eventually, he was arrested and charged with sodomy, burglary, and robbery. He, as in Panzram, hired a lawyer and promised him the yacht as payment. Panzram was released on bail and he left town immediately. When his attorney went to register the boat, he discovered it was stolen. He was out a boat and the bail money. 2 weeks later, Panzram was arrested for breaking into the Larchmont train station. He was using the alias of John O'Leary. Authorities there verified he was wanted in Oregon, where he was known as Jeff Baldwin, and that he had a 14-year sentence waiting for him. He was sent to Sing Sing prison and then transferred to Clinton prison, where difficult prisoners were sent. In 1924, he attempted to escape and jumped down 30 feet where he broke both of his ankles. This injury left him with a pronounced limp. During the time there, he fantasized of killing a huge amount of people at once. He was paroled in July 1928 from Dannemora prison. Within days of his release, he killed Alexander Uzaki, a paperboy in Philadelphia. He met Alexander at the foot of State Street in Philadelphia and lured him to a spot about a quarter mile from Pier 98. He raped and strangled the boy. When Uzaki's body was found, it was skeletonized and they couldn't identify the teenager. The body was wrapped in a blanket stolen from the Essington Yacht Club. Around the remains were some pieces of a radio set. He was buried in a pauper's grave, and it wasn't until Panzram's confession several months later that the body was exhumed and identified by his parents, Rashten and Helen Uzaki, who were Polish immigrants and lived at 205 Carpenter Street, Philadelphia. Panzram told police he had forced the youth to help him steal the radio and other articles from a yacht in the Delaware River. He also told police how he had left the boy's tennis shoes tied together near the body. These details confirmed to authorities that Panzram was not confessing to a crime he had not committed. A month later, he sodomized and killed a 16-year-old who was begging. He wore thick glasses, and after buying him something to eat, they went into the woods. Panzram waited for the boy to finish eating, then raped and strangled him. He said he enjoyed this murder the most because the boy said he was related to a policeman in Brooklyn, New York. The teenager was found within days of being murdered, but has never been identified. A week later, he was arrested for committing burglaries in Washington, D.C. Panzram, who stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, exuded menace. He had a large tattoo of a boat's anchor on his left forearm, another ankle with an eagle and the head of a Chinese man on his right forearm, and two eagles on his massive chest with the words liberty and justice tattooed underneath their wings. While awaiting trial, he started to confess to the murders of the teenagers. Up to that point, authorities believed that Panzram was just a serial burglar. One of his confessions involved the cold case of Henry McMahon. In 1922, the 12-year-old was lured into a pasture where his beaten and mutilated body was found. His head was battered, and there was evidence he was sodomized since Antonio Costello, a known child predator, was held for a time as a suspect. Later that same year, Costello was convicted of sexually assaulting another boy aged 12. I grabbed him, McMahon, this is what Panzram. I grabbed him, McMahon, by the arm and told him I was going to kill him, Panzram said in his confession. I stayed with the boy about 3 hours. During that time, I committed sodomy on the boy 6 times, and then I killed him by beating his brains out with a rock. I had stuffed down his throat several sheets of paper out of a magazine. Initially, police believed he was fabricating the crimes in order to be executed. However, his description of the murders were too detailed to be made up. He was sentenced to 25 years for the conviction on burglary charges and sent to Leavenworth Prison in November 1928. On March 26, 1929, Panzram made the following request in order to work in the laundry. Quote, I want that job because I am doing a long time and I'm an old crank. And I want to be by myself. I'm a cripple and the job I have now I don't like. Standing on my broken ankles bothers me. I am very truly Carl Panzram, number 31614. There he met Henry Lesser, a 26-year-old prison guard, who would give him $1 to buy cigarettes and food. The two became friends, and Lesser eventually slipped him a pencil and a few sheets of paper, urging him to write his life story. Later on, when he confessed to his many crimes, he said he often raped men he robbed, not because he was homosexual, but this was how he dominated and humiliated them. Authorities in the 3 jurisdictions where he killed the boys were preparing to charge him for the crimes. In January 1929, he confessed to the murder of a man in Texas. According to the El Paso Evening Post, he described the murder in a letter to the sheriff in this manner, quote, I killed the man. His name I do not know. I took his money, tied his feet together with a belt, tied his hands and then trussed his hands and feet together behind his back with a suspender. I tied him to a mesquite bush and kicked his head off and strangled him until he stopped wiggling. Whether he was ever found or if he is still there tied to that tree, I don't know. End quote. In February 1929, Panzram was transferred to Leavenworth Prison. 4 months later, he crushed civilian laundry foreman Robert Warnke's skull with a flat iron, then chased other prisoners around until he was subdued by guards. He was sent to solitary, and it was this crime which ultimately sent him to the gallows. Panzram's brother Albert, who lived near Seattle, hired M.J. Lane to represent his brother. The idea was to block extradition and declare Panzram insane. The prisoner refused to ask for executive clemency. His hanging was to be the first one in Kansas after 40 years. Panzram got the death he craved on September 5, 1930. Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard, he seethed at the executioner. Rage personified as he referred to himself until the end. I could kill 10 men while you're fooling around. After his body was taken down from the gallows, an autopsy was performed. His body was unclaimed, and he was buried in row number 6, grave number 24 of Leavenworth Cemetery. His tombstone was etched only with 31614. Lesser kept Panzram's writings, but publishers weren't comfortable with the graphic manuscript until 1970 when it was published as Killer, a Journal of Murder. Lesser donated Panzram's writings to San Diego State University in 1980. They are housed in the Malcolm A. Love Library as the Carl Panzram Papers. Quote, and this is from a quote from Carl Panzram, I believe the only way to reform people is to kill them. Talk about a dyed-in-the-wool sociopath. Wow. All right. let's go off to another story. This is out of Mysterious Universe, and it's titled Strange Cases of Demon Dogs and Hellhounds. One persistent sort of entity reported upon the landscape of the strangest the presence of dark, often spectral, large dogs, typically called hellhounds or sometimes demon dogs. Planted somewhere between cryptozoology and ghosts and hauntings, these creatures have been spotted all over the world, and here we will delve into some of the many cases of people encountering these bizarre beasts. Hellhounds have been recorded in one form or another throughout human history, from a variety of far-flung cultures, and the British Isles are a hotspot for such phenomena. Long have there been tales of phantom hounds that prowl the lonely roads, crypts, cemeteries, and wilds here, and stories of these hellhounds go back centuries. In the United Kingdom, they are known by as many names as there are places in which they are seen, which are many. The hounds have been known as the Girt Dog, Padfoot, Barquest, the Hairy Hound, the Yeth, Old Shock, Old Snarly Yow, and Old Scarf, among many others. In Ireland they are known as Puka. On the Isle of Man they are Madi Du. In Wales the Quigligi. And in Scotland the beastly hounds are called the Cooth Sith. The most popular and widely used term for these bizarre entities in the United Kingdom is the Black Shuck, a term which originated with the name the hounds were given in Norfolk, Suffolk, and Cambridgeshire, with the name deriving from the Old English word skuka, meaning demon, or possibly the word shucky, meaning shaggy or hairy. These frightening creatures were said to be anything from the ghosts of dead travelers to the spirits of dead hounds, awaiting the return of their masters, to inscrutable guardians of forbidden knowledge, to being the devil himself. The folklore and sightings of these huge, mysterious hounds go back centuries, inspiring a great amount of literature and spooky history in their path. One famous passage from Old Norfolk does a good job of describing the general reaction to their presence. Quote, "And a dreadful thing from the cliff did spring, and its wild bark thrilled around. His eyes had the glow of the fires below. 'Twas the form of the spectre hound." End quote. The appearance of the black hellhounds of the British Isles also varies depending on the area and the local traditions, but typically they are described as a very large hound that can range anywhere in size from that of a large Great Dane all the way up to the size of a cow or horse. They are usually described as truly frightening beasts, being totally black with shaggy or matted fur and large saucer-sized eyes that are typically described as burning with a malevolent red, yellow, or green glow, although some accounts say they have only a single luminous eye. Usually they are described as having formidable claws, vicious-looking fangs, and as being supernaturally agile, fast, and strong. The hounds can be reported as either tangible and real, or conversely purely spectral creatures, with any attempt to touch them proving to pass through them as if they aren't there. Folklore usually suggests that they have a horrific wail or howl, which can evoke sheer terror in those who hear it, and they are known to even have a sinister, human-sounding laugh, but their footfalls are typically completely silent. Particularly ominous details of many Black Shuck reports are the presence of fire and scorched earth in the wake of their appearance, and they are quite often regarded as being a bad omen. In his 1901 Highways and Byways in East Anglia, author W.A. Doot described the creature's appearance and calmly reported ability to predict or course death thus, quote, "He takes the form of a huge black dog and prowls along dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths, where although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once, should you see him, by his fiery eye. He has but one, and that, like the Cyclops, is in the middle of his head. But such an encounter might bring you the worst of luck. It is even said that to meet him is to be warned that your death will occur before the end of the year. So you will do well to shut your eyes if you hear him howling. Shut them even if you're uncertain whether it is the dog fiend or the voice of the wind you hear. Should you never set eyes on our Norfolk Snarl Yow, you may perhaps doubt his existence. Unlike others learned folks, tell us that his story is nothing but the old Scandinavian myth of the Black Hound of Odin, brought to us by the Vikings who long ago settled down on the Norfolk coast." Although this is the typical description, there is a wide range of variations. Sometimes these ghostly dogs are said to be wreathed in mist or to be shackled in chains. Other traditions claim that they even float or hover above the ground and are limbless or even headless. Other variations exist as well. In Balsham, Cambridgeshire, along Ratting Road, there was a hellhound with the body of a large black dog, but with a bald head and a face similar to a monkey, which reportedly often traveled about standing upright and would jump in front of vehicles, only to scamper out of the way or outright vanish right before impact. In Alcatraz, Lincolnshire, during the early 20th century, there was a black dog which allegedly had an abnormally long neck and muzzle. Still, other stories describe them as shapeshifters, typically said to take the form of a horse or donkey, and indeed reports of spectral horses seem to go hand in hand with mystery black dog sightings. The black hounds were even believed to be able to take the form of a human being. Other black shuck sightings are even more unsettling. At a place called Creag and Ordain, there were numerous reports of a black shuck that had the twisted, contorted face of a human, as well as two horns like those of a devil, which was said to portend disaster and death if it barked more than 2 times. This belief that the hellhounds could foresee death, misfortune, and disaster, or even cause them, is a commonly occurring theme with many black shuck accounts, and there is a long history of accounts of this reputation as a bad omen or harbinger of doom. One of the most popular tales from the lore says that if one looked upon one of these spectral hounds, especially if they made eye contact with it, then they would surely die within a year. Indeed, the black shuck was notorious for seeming to sow death wherever they went. In 1909, in the area of Ardura, Mole, Argyll and Bute, there was a phantom black dog well known for warning of impending death, such as in the case of a Dr. MacDonald, who saw black hounds shortly before his patient, a Murdoch Gillian MacLean, died. Often the black shuck is seen as predicting a specific incident. In the late 19th century, near Alveston, a Charles Walton claimed to have seen the same beastly black dog for several consecutive nights, and then suddenly, on one night, there stood the ghostly form of a headless woman in the place of the expected hellhound. It was later learned that his sister had died on that very night. In 1930, in Buxton, a man saw a large black dog while passing a churchyard. When he reached out to perhaps unwisely pat the dog's head, it is said to have promptly disappeared into thin air, and he subsequently learned that his brother had died at precisely the exact moment he had seen the dog. The list goes on, and these kind of accounts are not even confined to old reports either. As recently as 2000, a large black dog was reported to have run out in front of two women traveling between North Allerton and Leeming Bar, and the driver braked hard in a panic, fully expecting a possible fatal crash. But the creature was reported to have passed through the vehicle and was described as having no facial features and floppy ears. When the women reached their destination, the first person they talked to went on to kill himself shortly after. However, despite this malevolent reputation, the unearthly black hounds are not always seen as evil or malicious, and there are in fact many reports of them serving a more benevolent purpose, such as accompanying lone women or others as they made their way along darkened roads. For instance, in Cottingham, in the old Corby Road area, the ghostly dogs were seen as friends, walking amiably alongside lone travelers and dutifully warding away danger or misfortune, but promptly disappearing if touched or directly addressed in any way. In another case of seemingly benign intent, in the 18th century at Callingbourne, Kensington, in the vicinity of Marlborough Road, a large black spectral hound was said to have chased two men who had just been convicted of a brutal murder back to their village, after which they were arrested and the mysterious black dog proceeded to vanish without a trace. The black hellhounds were also attributed to other purposes as well. They were seen as guarding churches or to be the gatekeepers of various other portals, such as gates, doorways, or even the gates to the underworld or the entrance to hell itself. The black hellhounds are additionally sometimes depicted as being guardians of secret places or lost treasures. A tale particularly popular in Scotland, such as a giant black dog said to guard treasure buried under a standing stone near Merthley in Perthshire. The phantom black hellhound are usually solitary apparitions, but not always. In Eastbourne, in the Willingdon area, there were tales of three of the beasts roaming about the countryside together, and almost always seen to be a bad parent, portent of doom. In the Blandford Farm wooded area, there was even said to be a phantom hunt in which the ghostly voices of many dogs yelping and barking could be heard traversing the gloomy woodlands. The favorite haunts of the Black Shuck are said to be dark, lonely roads or secluded woodlands, and they seem to be inexorably drawn to crossroads and gallows sites, where they are often said to be the restless spirits of executed criminals. One infamous such Black Shuck is one that is said to haunt the gallows site of Tring, Hertfordshire, which is described as being around the size of a Newfoundland dog, with black shaggy fur, flaming eyes, and long jagged teeth. This hellhound is said to be the spirit of a woman executed for witchcraft in Tring in the year 1751. The accounts of huge phantom black dogs roaming the British countryside go way back. They can be traced all the way back to at least 856 AD, when it was written in a French manuscript that a giant black hound had burst into a church seemingly on the prowl for something before vanishing. In 1127, there was an account in the Peterborough Chronicle of an incident at the Peterborough Abbey, which described the incident as follows, quote, "Let no one be surprised at the truth of what we are about to relate, for it was common knowledge throughout the whole country that immediately after Abbot Henry of Poitou' arrival at Peterborough Abbey, it was the Sunday when they sing Exsurge Quare, many men both saw and heard a great number of huntsmen hunting. The huntsmen were black, huge, and hideous, and rode on black horses and on black he-goats, and their hounds were jet black with eyes like saucers and horrible. This was seen in the very deer park of the town of Peterborough, and in all the woods that stretch from that same town to Stamford, and in the night the monks heard them sounding and winding their horns. Reliable witnesses who kept watch in the night declared that there might well have been as many as 20 or 30 of them, winding their horns as near they could tell. This was seen and heard from the time of his arrival all through Lent and right up to Easter." End quote. The reports would continue until we come to one of the most dramatic and most infamous accounts of the phantom black hellhounds. On August 4, 1577, at the Holy Trinity Church in Blythburgh, a congregation was in progress with all most likely seemingly normal at the time except for the raucous lightning storm waging outside the church doors. This was all to change when an especially voluminous booming clap of thunder was said to be herald the arrival of a particularly malevolent hellhound, a snarling conglomeration of bristling black fur, teeth, and claws, which proceeded to burst through the doors and run amok, at one point ruthlessly slaughtering a man and a boy, peacefully engaging in prayer. Other people in the church were also struck down by the creature, which roamed up and down the aisles, roaring and lashing out. And although these victims survived, they were left with hideous scorch marks and charred flesh from some preternatural heat exuded by the monstrous entity. Some witnesses even claimed the thing was wreathed in fire and smoke. Such was the fury of the sudden attack that a steeple was said to have collapsed entirely through the roof to come crashing down spectacularly upon the stone floor below. On its way out, the mysterious black hellhound allegedly created formidable black scorch marks upon the church door, which are said to be visible to this day, and which are often referred to as the devil's fingerprints. On this very same day, the same black hellhound reportedly continued on its rampage to unleash its fury upon a church in Bungay, Suffolk, a mere 12 miles away, where it killed several more churchgoers with supernatural, merciless swiftness. In this instance, a Reverend Abraham Fleming later wrote of the incident, quote, "This black dog, or the divil in such lineness, God he knoweth at who worketh all, running all along down the body of the church with great swiftness and incredible haste among the people, in a visible form and shape passed between two persons, as they were kneeling upon their knees, and occupied in prayer as it seemed, wrung the necks of them both at one instant, clean backward, and so much that even at a moment where they kneeled, they strangely died." End quote. To this day, Bungay's coat of arms is emblazoned with the image of a black dog, dashing past a lightning bolt, and the area's folklore carries on the tradition of this harrowing encounter to this day. Black dog sightings in the same general vicinity continued for many years after, with sightings from here made as recently as 1973, when a man working near the church heard the panting of a large dog, yet the beast chose to remain invisible. In another harrowing encounter from the 70s, a man passing by the very same church claimed that a huge black dog, the size of a horse, came loping at him from the darkness, only to disappear before impact. Modern sightings such as this pop up from time to time all over the United Kingdom. On April 19, 1972, a Coast Guard by the name of Graham Grant, who was working the night shift at Garliston Rescue Headquarters, sighted a large black hound roaming along the beach about a quarter of a mile from his lookout. In this case, the hound was said to be sniffing about and looking around as if searching for something or someone. Grant watched the strange beast for about 2 minutes before it inexplicably vanished into thin air right before his eyes. The Coast Guard had recently been transferred and had never heard any tales of the black shuck before, and it was only when a colleague heard of his encounter and explained the old stories that the full bizarreness of what he had seen dawned on him. Indeed, eyewitness accounts of phantom black dogs persistently continue to come in even to this day from all over the United Kingdom. At first glance, these stories may seem to be no more than merely local folklore and spooky stories, yet in recent times there has been evidence that the tales may at least be partially based on a grain of truth. In May of 2014, an archaeology group from London called Dig Ventures uncovered something strange, buried 20 inches down in the earth under the ruins of Leiston Abbey, Suffolk, which is incidentally located only a few miles from where the rampaging Hellhound was said to have killed worshippers in the two churches of Blythburgh and Bungay back in 1577. There, interred under the ruins, were the bones of an enormous dog that was estimated to have stood 7 feet tall on its hind legs and to have weighed around 200 pounds. Based on pottery fragments found on the same level as the bones were claimed to have dated back to the days when Leiston Abbey was in operation in the 1100s, making them possibly connected to some of the old tales of a large black hellhound in the vicinity. The remains exhibited a wound to the leg, suggesting that the enormous animal had been buried there intentionally as a sort of funeral. The finding of the bones of such a large dog so close to where such legendary accounts of the black shuck took place certainly points to some interesting possibilities. The director of Dig Ventures, Brendan Wilkins, said of the matter, quote, "The story of Black Shuck has to have originated from somewhere, and who knows, it could have originated from the dog which was buried here." End quote. It is open for debate as to just what significance these bizarre, unearthed remains hold concerning the Black Shuck phenomena, but there is certainly something going on here. Considering the rich history of sightings of a large black hellhounds from all across the region, what could possibly be behind this phenomena? Is this all the result of superstition, mass hysteria, or hallucinations? Are we dealing with some sort of real flesh and blood animal, or is there something more supernatural at work here? Are these spirits, demons, ghosts, or something different entirely? It is hard to say. This is a case which, in my opinion, seems to represent a complicated witch's brew of folklore, real sightings, urban legends, and the paranormal. It is a case which to me at best lies in the very outer fringes of cryptozoology, in the dark badlands where the line between real animals and distinctly supernatural become blurry and faded. I'm not sure we can call these entities, or whatever they are, a cryptid. Yet neither am I ready to say for sure that they are entirely supernatural in nature, nor totally disregard them as pure legend. The Black Shuck of the United Kingdom is certainly in a unique category all its own, and whatever they are, they continue to dwell somewhere with that shadowland between myth, reality, and the world of otherworldly phenomena, perhaps lying just beyond our current understanding of the universe. These creatures are certainly not confined to the old folklore of Britain, and there are many real modern sightings and encounters with apparent hellhounds across the pond in the United States, and these have come to right into the present. We started at the Appalachian Mountains of the eastern United States, which have been quite a few reports of what seems to be hellhounds, especially in the states of Kentucky and West Virginia. Reports go back quite some time, with some accounts coming from as early as the late 17th century of a great black dogs with glowing eyes terrorizing the region, and such accounts have continued into more recent times. In Kentucky, there have long been reports of massive black dogs measuring about 4 feet high at the shoulder and 7 feet long, and one of these beasts allegedly prowled the area of Pike County throughout the 1930s and 40s, purportedly massacring cattle and sometimes even humans, as well as frightening locals. In modern times, such reports drew the interest of paranormal and cryptid investigators for the TV show Mountain Monsters, who went to the area for an investigation. The excursion would turn out to be pretty bizarre, if inconclusive. The investigators spoke with farmers in the area who showed them torn apart carcasses of livestock and gave spooky accounts of something large and dark prowling through the wilderness. They were also shown an alleged video of the beast as well as paw prints measuring 7.5 to 8 inches long, very big for a dog. During the investigation, the team built a bamboo drop cage and baited it with hog shoulders in an effort to lure it out. And although they didn't catch it, they did hear something crashing around in the brush, growling, and could see a large shadow. It was all very dramatic, and whether the episode has any truth to it or not, Kentucky and other areas of Appalachia still have produced many reports of hellhounds. Another somewhat wolf-like beast reported from the Appalachians is a giant black dog with an enormous red mouth and jagged fangs that supposedly marauds through the countryside near South Mountain, Maryland, and is known as the Snarly Yow, as well as the black dog or sometimes dog fiend. Reports of the creature mostly seems to revolve around a pass where the old national road cuts across a brook in a canyon. Rather than an actual flesh and blood animal, there are a variety of elements to the accounts that seem to suggest it is more of a phantom or spectral beast, with the purported ability to change colors from black to white, as well as grow or shrink in size at will. Other reports claim that hunters who try to shoot the creature will find that their bullets pass right through it, while still others claim that the creature can phase through walls or trees. The Snarly Yow has a long history of causing mischief and mayhem. In colonial times, it was said that the creature would appear long enough to terrify horses until they threw their riders off in a panic, after which the beast would simply vanish. This disconcerting habit would carry over into modern times and modern transportation, as it has been reported that the Snarly Yow will lunge in front of cars, after which the driver will swerve and crash, trying to avoid what they see as a dog in the road. As soon as the driver gets out, they typically will see the fierce creature growl and bare its fangs at them before simply disappearing into thin air. The Snarly Yow also seems to enjoy simply chasing cars down the road for the fun of it, or frightening hikers in the area, sometimes reportedly planting itself in the path of hikers and refusing to move, thereby forcing them to find an alternate route. Although it may seem like a malevolent monster at first glance, the Snarly Yow is nevertheless not known to attack people. Also on the East Coast is an account from Connecticut, where a witness on the site Real Unexplained Mysteries claims to have lived in an apartment that was haunted by shadow people and the apparition of some sort of massive spectral hound. The thing would first appear one night, looming over their bed, and she would describe the terrifying experience thusly, quote, I woke with it over my then boyfriend. It is very immense, stands like a human, has red eyes, long pointy nails. The hands are not like ours, but not paws, has a very unique snout, more pronounced than a canine. It is no dog, but a beast. I warded it off. I had so much fear I guess I had nothing to lose, and hovered over my boyfriend, almost like a dog. Told myself, show no fear, and I can't even explain the immense anger I felt. It does not speak like us, but more in mind, almost perception. I growled like it in my mind and remembered thinking, stay away. That's when the anger swept over me. It backed up and vanished into the wall. I wish I could say it was a happy ending, but it wasn't. I started having night terrors always ending in my death every night. End quote. This report fits in well with the lore of hellhounds being spectral entities rather than physical ones, and also matches some of the pervasive stories of them somehow feeding off of fear. What did she see? We'll likely never know. Moving up to Michigan, we also have reports of outsized canine monstrosities, and one report posted in Jason Offutt's blog from the shadows comes from the area of Romulus, Michigan. The witness, known as S. Costea, claimed that he had been living with his family at a cabin on a farm there at the time, which was all surrounded by thick woods. That was the home of something rather unusual, to say the least. According to Costea, there was some sort of dog creature about the size of a Great Dane and with glowing red eyes that skulked about in the darkness there in the evening hours, and he would say of it, quote, we had this really strange dog creature that would hang around the property. I say dog creature because this thing was far too big and intelligent to be a stray dog. It had very pronounced red eyes. I'm not saying it was a werewolf or a dog man, but it was very werewolf like. The dog would frequently stalk the edge of the woods on our property in the day. It seemed to have no fear. My uncle would yell at it or throw things towards it to try to scare it off, but it would simply rear up on its hind legs like a ram and charge at him. For a short distance, we would frequently find dead chickens or rabbits after thunderstorms. We knew it was that dog thing because it would leave huge paw prints in the mud and claw marks on the window ledges. Sometimes we would find the screens ripped from our screen doors and windows. It would never outright attack us, but it did seem to enjoy taunting us and harassing us. End quote. This was all frightening enough, but it got even weirder when it demonstrated an ability to walk about on 2 feet for short durations, and even more bizarrely began to speak, seeming to call people outside for some insidious purpose. Costea claims that his mother found him one night sitting by the window talking to the creature, and would describe the surreal scene as follows, quote, one summer night, my mom had left the window open in my bedroom to cool the room off so I could sleep. She was on her way to the bathroom and went by my room and heard me talking to someone. When she opened the door, she saw me standing in my bed and had apparently wet my pajamas. I was talking towards the window. I wasn't screaming or freaking out, but seemed to be transfixed and talking in a low voice toward the window. When she looked towards the window, the dog had its 2 front paws pushed through the screen and was looking through the window at us and making a low growl. Its eyes glared red. I always recall its eyes. You could see its eyes out in the woods sometimes at night. I have bad dreams about it from time to time. End quote. The boy's mother then threw a beer bottle at the thing to chase it off, but for the next few weeks, Costa allegedly displayed odd behavior, and the house pets would not go near him. He would also blurt out cryptic messages such as, "We don't want you here," or "Our ghosts are food," or "God thinks you're bad," and would sometimes intentionally prick himself with sharp objects, until he drew blood. It almost seemed as if the thing at the window had crawled into his head somehow, and that this was kind of a demonic possession, to an extent. The frightening ordeal would finally come to an end when his uncle hit it with a rifle, and Coster would say of this, quote, my uncle was out back working on his truck when he saw the dog at the edge of the woods making its way in towards the rabbit pen. At this point, he was tired of dealing with it and went into the house to get his .22. Apparently, he fired at it and it hit it in the rear. The dog turned and ran into the woods. We didn't see it anymore after that, and everything cleared up. End quote. Also from Michigan is a report from the unlikely locale of Detroit, where a witness living in one of the city's suburbs claims he had an encounter with a hellhound in 2012. He claims that one evening he was driving through his neighborhood after leaving his girlfriend's house at around midnight when he saw some streak of movement coming from someone's backyard, and he described it as being a very large and well-built creature. He immediately stopped his car in order to get a view of the thing and was first impressed with how incredibly fast it moved for its size, estimated as around 40 to 50 miles per hour. He observed it for a moment before it streaked out of view and would describe it, quote, the creature was very large. If I had to compare the size to another animal, I'd say it was about the size of an adult lion. The body type appeared to be that of a dog, although I've never seen any breed of dog this size, and there were absolutely no wild stray dogs in the area. It had a pitch black coat, and while I could slightly make out the shape of its head from the side, I never saw its eyes or mouth. When it ran past my headlights initially, it never acknowledged my presence. It did not turn and look at me, slow down, or do anything that was directed towards me. I feel confident that if this was a hellhound, it was not looking for me, but I don't know that for sure. In nearby Wisconsin, excuse me, we have reports emanating from a place called Meridian Island on the Chippewa River, which according to a few witness accounts seems to be prowled by some sort of canine beast. One report comes from a young couple by the name of Shelley Touchstone and Chris Weiner, who were at the island's boat landing looking for a secluded spot when a thick fog or mist began to form out of nowhere, and which seemed to instill an inexplicable dread in them. Then they heard something moving about and growling in a menacing fashion just out of the periphery of their vision, as well as a large shadow as big as a bear with 2 pinpoints of glowing red eyes. On another occasion, 2 men named Mike Bogozzi and Jeremy Stark were in the very same area when they too felt a sudden onset of dread and witnessed the fog congeal out of nowhere. Then they apparently spotted a large black hound with matted, filthy hair, which gave chase as they ran away. They only apparently managed to evade it when they got to their car and locked the doors, after which it meandered off into the wilderness and vanished. These cases hit a couple of interesting points in that hellhounds are supposedly fond of areas near water, and also that many supernatural phenomena seem to involve a fog or mist, although whatever this connection may be is misunderstood. Going down south, we have a case from the state of Louisiana in a report published by the National Cryptid Society. The report comes from the area of Robeline, Louisiana, in 1995, and concerns a witness who claims he was in a graveyard looking for paranormal phenomena, the two of them armed with crosses and an M16, which seems a bit extreme, but here we are. As they pushed on forward into the cemetery, they allegedly heard strange growling noises, and the witness described what happens next. Quote, "We shined our flashlights all over the graveyard. It was small and enclosed by fence. I said it must be a dog tied over at the parsonage. The church and parsonage was about 500 feet away, so I shined around, and over in the corner of the graveyard I saw 4 fresh graves. They were apart from the other graves. They had no flowers, just 2 big graves and 2 small ones marked by 4 iron crosses. As we went to explore, we heard the growling growl louder. I said, 'Laney, is that dog loose?' I kind of felt a little safe knowing it would be hard for it to jump the fence, but as we got closer to the grave, the hair on my neck stood up and I got chills. My friend got the same feeling. The growls had a sound like Rottweilers. They chilled you to the bone, and you felt something wasn't right. We heard the snarling as we got a few feet from the grave. The growls were not part of a body. They were disembodied. Then I tried to rationalize it in my head. Is it a couple loose, mean dogs outside the gate? Is it a group of coyotes? But as we shined the light, this time we saw them. 2 sets of glowing red eyes not attached to a body. They were only 3 feet away and stood guard by those graves. My friend froze in fright and pushed me in front. He was crying about leaving his gun. I said, 'Laney, your gun won't help against this.' The dogs were vicious, and I said, 'Lonnie, whatever you do, don't run.' I prayed for guidance. I had not been to church in many a year, but I knew what I was dealing with was straight from hell. I looked right at them. I showed my cross and said, 'I know what you are.' They snarled louder. My friend was really upset and wanting this, his mama. I said, 'Lonnie, please.' I said, 'I demand in the name of Jesus Christ that you allow us to leave as we come in peace and alone. I demand this in the name of the Son of Man and victor over all that is evil. I said that the Son of Man ruled over all evil and demand that you let us leave in peace.' We slowly backed up. As we got to the gate, we left." End quote. This particular report seems to go overboard a bit, but who knows? All the way over on the other side of the country, we come to California, which has a few accounts of hellhounds of its own. From American Canyon, California, comes an account from a 28-year-old witness known as Jedediah, who claims that one night as he was walking back from a market, he heard an ear-piercing howl echo out into the night. He soon caught sight of a very large dog, which he at first took to be a stray or someone's pet, but which seemed to be too large to be such a thing. As he looked more closely, he saw that it seemed to have glowing red eyes, and to be entangled with what looked to be barbed wire. He would say of what happened next, quote, "At this point, I was quite scared. I continued on my way home, and I found myself dreading each corner, fearing another sighting of this hellish creature. I had almost made it home when the beast appeared again. This time it stood directly in my path. I was frozen with fear, hair standing up on end, and I closed my eyes fearing an attack. It started to growl, a deep rumbling growl, one that I felt deep in my soul, one that threatened to turn my legs to jello. I don't know what compelled me to do so, but I started praying to the Lord and Jesus Christ in heaven to make this beast leave, but the growling intensified. It seemed as if the growl just pulsated through my mind, doing everything in its power to get me to stop praying. I continued to pray. I just prayed and prayed and prayed. As I continued to pray, the growling slowly dissipated. When I finally opened my eyes, all that was left was scorch marks where the dog stood. To this day, I have yet to see the same dog or another like it. So this begs the question, what did I see? A hellhound? A spectral creature, some sort of demon? I never will know, but then again, I'm not sure I want to." End quote. Also in California, that has made the rounds involving what seems like a pack of hellhounds in Palm Springs, California. 2013, there were supposedly numerous reports of large black hounds running amok in the streets with glowing eyes and sharp fangs. The creatures were described as having the bodies of dogs, but the heads of wolves, and battled all who saw them. Apparently, they tore through people's yards and even attacked a man's car to rip up his bumper before disappearing into the night to vanish. There's very little to corroborate this, but it is a strange case indeed. The setting for another tale of some sort of demon dog is the rustic mountain town of Valle Crucis, North Carolina, the name which is Latin for Valley of the Cross, due to the convergence of two streams that come together at a nearly perfect right angle in the valley. One of the most notable landmarks of the town is St. John's Episcopal, an ancient-looking stone church that sits alongside Highway 194 and butts up against a spooky graveyard, overgrown with trees and weeds that choke the old crumbling gravestones. Although this graveyard, like many others of its kind, has its share of ghost stories, perhaps the wildest of these is that of some sort of large demon hound that seems to have stepped out of hell itself, roaming its premises. Stories of this apparition have been passed around since the 1800s, with the beast usually described as a massive hulking black dog with glowing red or green eyes, and often wreathed in a mist or smoke. The most well-known modern account of this creature supposedly happened as two young men were driving down the highway past the old church when an ominous large shadow leaped out of the adjacent graveyard to land right in front of the vehicle, causing the startled driver to slam his brakes and pull over. At first, they assumed it was just a regular dog, but the first tip-off that this wasn't the case came when the thing looked up to reveal blazing, glowing eyes that pierced the darkness, and it then dawned on the witnesses that the thing was absolutely enormous, standing as tall as a man. As they peered through the gloom at the strange beast, they could see that it had pitch-black, disheveled hair all over, and prominent fangs, all of which were sinister enough to keep the men from getting out of their car. The creature allegedly stared at them for a few moments before loping down the road towards them, which was enough to snap the driver from his daze of fear and send them screaming off as fast as they could go. According to the witness, the thing then proceeded to chase them, easily keeping up with them as they crept up to 50, 60, and even 70 miles per hour, showing no signs of falling into the distance. According to the tale, it was only as they went roaring over a bridge spanning the cross-shaped river that the hound came to a halt, refusing to go any further, and merely pacing back and forth on that spot until it was out of view. While this is the most well-known account of the demon dog, it is certainly not the only one, and there have been other reports of seeing this spectral hound as well. One comes from a Reddit user who claims that his encounter had come during a skiing and snowboarding trip in the mountains of the area, along with his best friend Stephen and his family. One day during the trip, they decided to head out to have a meal at the Daniel Boone Inn, a popular location in the area, and they began their drive back up to the ski resort, his uncle at the wheel. During the drive, they passed by the famous St. John's Episcopal Church, and it was at that moment that the witness claims the van they were in just suddenly and without warning ground to a halt. At first, everyone thought the uncle was pulling a prank, but then they noticed that there was a sheen of terror on his face, and the witness describes what happened next. Quote, "He had his eyes dead affixed to the back window, as if he was in a trance. Then I saw it too. Behind the vehicle, and just beyond the light of the brakes, there was this thing. It had the head and scruff of a great black wolf. The body was of a man, almost, though the arms weren't too long, and it was standing upright on two muscular legs. It just didn't make any sense. But whatever it was, it had my friend deadlocked through the eyes, and he was absolutely mortified. About that time, my mother saw it too. At least, I think she did, though she won't talk about it to this day. All I heard was her screaming for my uncle to start the car and move. The van rumbled a few seconds later. We started back down this road towards the house, and all the while me and Stephen are looking out that back window. What we saw makes me shudder to this day. The creature dropped down and was running behind our vehicle on unnatural fours. The way it ran was so effed up. I still lose sleep, like it was running ahead of time. It was so smooth and graceful, but I'll never forget how disturbing it was in its locomotion. Nothing natural should move that way. Watching it run locked me in, and everything around just kind of melted away. The worst part was that we weren't losing it. We weren't doing an easy 60 miles per hour on this desolate highway, but it was right behind us, right behind the van. Its face was like an exaggerated cartoon caricature of a wolf, but all too real. It was like something out of a nightmare. What I remember most are the eyes, like two cigar embers, but with a yellow iris unmoving, and a deep dark black pupil in the center of each hellish orb. They were transfixing, hypnotic. I guess maybe the fear overwhelmed me because the next day I woke up in my bed at the mountain house. It was morning. To this day, it takes Stephen quite a few drinks to discuss it, and even then he can't have a serious conversation about it. I think he hides behind humor, but I know he remembers it just as well as I do. End quote. Another report, which is actually how I heard about this whole phenomenon to begin with, came to me directly from a reader who had seen my previous articles on hellhounds. The witness, who wishes to remain anonymous, reported that she had been driving past that creepy church one evening with her husband, and that out of the night bloomed the dark form of something bulky and white and wide sitting right in the middle of the road, coming up fast as they pumped their brakes. She says of what they saw as they slowly approached and what happened next. Quote, it was a very large black form, as big as a bear, hunched over, heaving as it were taking very big breaths. We actually thought it was a bear at first, but then it looked up, and we could see it had a sort of reddish glow to its eyes and a distinctive canine look. It looked sort of like a mastiff, but much larger, all muscular and bunched up, with scraggly hair struck up in all directions. Then, without warning, it came running at us at full speed. There was no time for us to get the car into gear and escape. This thing was bearing down on us, and just as we braced for impact, it just wasn't there anymore. It had vanished, and that was that. End quote. The demon hound of Valle Crucis has become quite a fixture in the area and has grown to become a part of the local lore. We are left to try and figure out what we are dealing with here. Is it an urban legend which people have added to over the years to the point that it's taken on a life of its own? Is it one of the mysterious hellhounds of lore? The interesting idea that has been posited is that it could be that what is referred to as a church grim, which is linked to a custom that harkens back to the old days. It was once believed that the first person to be buried in a cemetery was doomed to be saddled with the duty of watching over it forevermore. So people would often arrange to have a large black hound buried in their stead, making the dog the eternal guardian. Whatever it is, and whether this is an urban legend and spooky campfire tales or something else, cases of so-called hellhounds of this nature can be found all over the world, and it certainly gives one something to think about if they ever go driving past that old church and cemetery. Such creatures surely seem to toe the line between the real and fantasy, where we are not really sure what we should be looking at. What are hellhounds? How can they possibly be? Are these some sort of demonic entities, wandering spirits, or what? Are they misidentifications of a large dog or some wildlife? These reports seem to be beyond explanation and show that these old legends from across the world have seemed to seep into the realm of the real. Whatever they are, hellhounds have been spotted all over the world, and the United States is no exception. So there you go. Interesting, huh? Very interesting. Well, I hope you enjoyed this segment of Eerie News, and I will be back soon with some more weird stuff because, let's face it, weird is interesting, right? So till next time, take care.